Please take your seats, if you can find some seats for the next speaker. All right, thanks everybody. So the next speaker needs no introduction, but I'm gonna give him a little one just for the hell of it. So we're gonna do, after my introduction, we'll have a 30-minute chat, then we'll do another quick Q&A as well. And then after that, we'll have a concert happening in the exhibition space downstairs by that big tape installation. But for now, please get very excited for our next speaker. It is extraordinary to now welcome to the stage someone who, at the core, kind of an existentialist like our last guest, thinks about the nature of existence and perception and our place in the world, but from a radically different approach. But still addresses some of the big questions of life. So Jason Silva, apart from being a really nice guy, Jason Silva is also an Emmy-nominated TV host, as you know, a storyteller, and a modern philosopher. It is his mission to use technology to excite people about philosophy and science, to explore the depths of what it means to be human, and open in people's minds the infinite potential of what our future might hold. Jason has an exceptional ability to address the huge contrasts of life, both the macro and the micro, to be deep at the same time as far-reaching, to appeal to both intellectual and emotional intelligence, to provide answers at the same time as questions, to learn from the most cutting-edge science, and at the same time as the most ancient of wisdoms. He is also an inspiring example of someone who has understood the power of the mind, and more than that, who is able to remind others of it. Jason is known for having hosted 5 seasons of the global hit TV series Brain Games, and is constantly traveling the world answering thousands of speaking requests he receives. So we're very lucky to have him here at Unfinished, and incredibly honored. So please give it up for Jason Silva.
Wow. Well, that was such a warm and kind introduction. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you guys for showing up. What a thrill to be here in Bucharest. I feel so welcome. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wow, just feels so nice to be received like this, I gotta say. So, my name is Jason Silva, as you guys know. Some people know me for hosting Brain Games on the National Geographic Channel, which is all about our perceptions and also our misperceptions of reality. I do believe that reality is coupled to perception, so if you shift perception, you shift reality. And this is definitely a big interest of mine. Now, where does this all begin for me? Well, I suppose it begins with the fire in the belly, right? The existential conundrum that is the human condition, right? To have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feeling, an excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression, and with all this, yet to die. Ernest Becker said it best, we are in quite the predicament. We have the mental capacity to ponder the infinite, seemingly capable of anything, yet we're housed in heart-pumping, breath-gasping, decaying bodies. We are simultaneously gods and worms, right? This is the faint disquiet. This is the worm at the core. Sheldon Solomon said, the explicit awareness that you're a breathing piece of defecating meat destined to die and ultimately no more significant than a lizard or a potato is not especially uplifting. That is the existential bummer. When I became aware of this existential conundrum, when I first apprehended the idea of mortality, it sent me on a freaking panic attack of cosmological proportions, needing to find some way to address this disjointment. I believe it was Dostoevsky who said that man needs to find a way of bridging the finite and the infinite. We have to find a way of blasting new tunnels between the mind and the other, to commune with something larger and greater than ourselves, to create grand narratives and stories that allow us to move beyond what we are, to probe what Stephen Johnson calls the adjacent possible, all the ways in which we are unfinished, right? The adjacent possible is a shadow from the future that hovers over the present and provides a map of all the ways in which the present can reinvent itself. Why not? This is the human project. This is the human enterprise. This is the human story. We didn't stay in the caves. We haven't stayed on the planet. Hopefully, we won't even stay within the limitations of our biology, right? Alan Harrington said, any philosophy that accepts death must itself be considered dead. Its questions meaningless. Its consolations worn out. We must never forget we are cosmic revolutionaries, right? Not stooges conscripted to advance a natural order that kills everyone. We are unfinished, and we are just getting started. So then this has turned into a passion for creativity. This has turned into a passion for human imagination. And it's also turned into a passion for technology, right? Because technology is the embodiment of human creativity in the world. Technology is the literalization of human imagination in the world. Technology is how we turn the human mind inside out and how we impregnate the world with mind. The cognitive philosophers David Chalmers and Andy Clark, they describe technology as a scaffolding of mind that we use to extend our thoughts, our reach, and our vision. And it has always been so. We have always been unfinished. 100,000 years ago, in the savannas of Africa, when early hominids were trying to survive and first picked up a stick on the ground, and we used that stick to reach a fruit that was on a really high tree, we've been using our tools, our sticks, our instruments to extend our limits, to overcome our boundaries, to transcend our limitations. It's what we've always done. As the philosopher Marshall McLuhan famously said, we build the tools, but then the tools build us. And we've been in a sort of symbiotic, self-reinforcing relationship with our technology since the dawn of man, right? Now today we're living in the age of radical disruption. We're living in the age of technological acceleration. We're living in the age of disruptive innovation, right? Disrupt or be disrupted is the name of the game, and some people are excited and some people are scared, and people don't know what to do with technology because they don't know if this means that we're playing God or messing with nature or what the fuck. But the truth is, technology has always transformed who we are. Technology has always disrupted the status quo. Right? The emergence of language transformed humanity. The domestication of fire transformed humanity. The difference is that these technological innovations used to occur over many generations, right? You were born into a world and you died in a world that didn't change very much. And so you didn't really feel the ways in which tools and technology slowly disrupted the human condition. Now it's very different. Now we're living in the age of exponential technological disruption. What does this mean? Why does it feel today like the human project is up for grabs? Why does it feel today like we are self-directing the evolutionary process? This has to do with the fact, and in simple terms, that technology evolves at an exponential rate. You guys are probably familiar with the term Moore's Law. Well, basically, exponential change is counterintuitive to how human beings see change. So human beings are linear thinkers. Human beings evolved in a world that was linear and that was local. And now we live in a world that is global and that is exponential. So the world changes exponentially. Human beings see everything linearly. So there's this cognitive disjointment, this cognitive dissonance. We never see the future coming. We're future blind. We're fatalistic. We don't see the unique opportunity that we have to transform ourselves. So what's the difference between linear change and exponential change? The great example used by Ray Kurzweil, head of engineering at Google, the author of The Singularity is Near When Humans Transcend Biology, is the following example. If you take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, by step 30, you get to 30. That's linear change. 30 steps gets you to 30. That is not how technology changes. If you take the same amount of steps, 30 steps, exponentially, by step 30, you're actually at 1 billion. Take that in for a second, right? Imagine for a moment, 30 linear steps gets you to 30, 30 exponential steps gets you to 1 billion. That's the reason why the smartphone in your pocket today is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than what used to be a $60 million supercomputer that was half a building in size 40 years ago. So what used to be the size of this auditorium has shrank down in 40 years thanks to exponential innovation to a device that fits in your pocket. 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, 1,000 times more powerful. How does this change what becomes possible? How does this let us know all the ways in which we are unfinished? The folks at Singularity University say that a young kid in Africa with a smartphone today, or in Bucharest with a smartphone today, has better communications technology than a head of state, than a president had 25 years ago. So each of you have more computation in your pocket than a president had 25 years ago. How does this change what becomes possible? And these exponential trends are not going away. Billion-dollar corporations like Intel and Cisco and Western Digital have to plan exponentially for the days in which this will shrink down to the size of a blood cell-sized device that'll be in our bodies and brains, reverse engineering us from inside out. Because exponential progress is continuing. We are unfinished. And this has become almost like a law of nature. In fact, Kevin Kelly from Wired magazine refers to technology as the technium, the seventh kingdom of life, something that is subject to the same evolutionary forces and self-organization as biological evolution. So there's something big going on, right? And we're smack in the middle between the born and the made. So I think these ideas are fucking awesome. And I like to turn people on to get out of their cognitive comfort zone, to get out of their cognitive Kansas, and to go to Oz, right? Once a mind is stretched by a new idea, it will never return to its original position. And these ideas are the biggest ideas in the history of the world. Not only are we mortal beings, not only are we worms, we are also gods. And having invented the gods, we can turn into them. So I want to show you some videos today as we continue the story. The first video is called "To Be Human is to Be Transhuman," and it's an anthem on the unique human capacity, right? To know what we are, but to know not what we might be. Please play the first video in the back. So there's a great line by Shakespeare in which he says, "We know what we are, we know not what we may be." And in the age of accelerating technologies in which we extend the cognitive reach of our minds, the perimeters of our humanness with these extensions of self, these exoskeletons, these technological scaffoldings, you know, the wings of our aircrafts and the signals traveling through our smartphones, sending our thoughts electrified at the speed of light across oceans of sky. We redefine and extend what it means to be human. Edward O. Wilson says, we have actually decommissioned natural selection, and now we must look deep within ourselves and decide what we wish to become. We are now the chief agents of evolution. We have reversed engineered the software of biology and are about to rewire and upgrade and redefine what it is to be a Homo sapien. Juan Enriquez uses the term Homo evolutus, the being that evolves itself, that transforms itself, right? Ray Kurzweil, we didn't stay in the caves. We haven't stayed on the planet. Biology, just another membrane to be transcended. You know, Marvin Minsky used to say, will robots inherit the earth?
Yes, they will, but they will be our children. You know, I love this idea because we hear the term transhumanism, and what it means to be human is to be transhuman. We are the species that transforms and transcends. We never stopped. We always did. It's what we are.
So this was one of the first videos that I did in the space of celebrating our transhumanity, which I think fits very well with the theme that we are unfinished. To be human is to be transhuman. If you study the human species, we see we are a tool-making animal. We create these cognitive scaffoldings, these exoskeletons, and we redefine what we are, right? We design, and we are being actively designed by what we design, right? We build the tool, and then the tool builds us. So we've been a self-creating species. It's kind of unbelievable. So you see these exponential advances happening right now, right? It's the name of the game for entrepreneurship and creativity, right? Everybody's like, what's the next thing? And I travel around the world and I talk to companies all across the planet, and people say, fine, okay, exponential progress, super cool in the world of digital, right? Artificial intelligence. But what about the world of biology and flesh? What about the world of like physical materials, right? We still live in a world made of flesh and concrete, and certainly that's not moving exponentially, right? But it turns out that both biology and concrete are becoming information technologies now. So what that means is that they become subject to these exponential advancements. The next trillion-dollar hackable economic space is going to be the age of biology, right? Biotechnology means mastering the information processes of biology. This is truly how we will engender our own divinity, so to speak, because we're using mind. We're using this emergent property of consciousness to self-direct the evolutionary process by learning to master the information processes of biology. Because it turns out that we are made of language. It turns out that we are made of code. We are alphabetic all the way down. DNA is software. And we are increasingly learning to program that software. The physicist Freeman Dyson wrote an essay called The Age of Biology, in which he envisioned a very near future where a new generation of artists will be writing genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses. Imagine for a second the poetry in a statement like that. That we will be composing genomes with the artistry, with the sublime poetic capacity that we write verse. What are we going to make when the canvas for our genius is biology itself? And by the way, those exponential numbers, gene sequencing, just as an example, the speed at which we can sequence our genomes is going 3 times faster than Moore's law in its progress. 3 times faster. There's a reason why Larry Page, who co-founded Google, started Calico, the California Life Extension Company, a software company for biology that scored a Time magazine cover story called Google and the End of Death. This is not science fiction, folks. These are the conversations happening in the water cooler at the TED conference, where billionaires are discussing the ways in which they're going to radically extend their lifespan to 1,000 years. And don't think that these technologies will be only for the rich. When people contest these ideas and say, oh, so this is going to be a new elitism, I say, just look at the cell phone. These technologies at first don't work very well and are very expensive, but because they are information technologies, the price point eventually drives down to 0. And now somebody in rural Africa has a wireless phone in their pocket better than a head of state had 25 years ago. So this will spread to everyone. Breathe. When Craig Venter, who was the first guy to synthesize an artificial life form, was asked in a press conference, do you worry that you're playing God? He answered, jokingly but half serious, who's playing? It's true. So that's biotechnology. So artificial intelligence continues to advance exponentially. Biotechnology, mastering biology, programming biology advances exponentially. Medication, right? Medical care, that whole world is going to be hacked. Right? Get rid of cancer, software updates for our biology, and then augmenting ourselves. Talk about differentiation. I mean, right now, people want to express their individuality. They do it with a couple of piercings, some tattoos, their taste in clothes, and their taste in music. Expressing yourself in the future will be literally speciation. You'll be able to make yourself your own style of biological organism, I imagine. Things are going to get weird. Then you have nanotechnology. Nanotechnology basically allows us to pattern atoms, which are the building blocks of the physical world, to pattern and program atoms the way that we pattern and program ones and zeros with digital technology. So with nanotech, the physical world becomes a programmable medium, literally. When the psychedelic philosopher Terence McKenna said that human beings live in the condensation of human imagination, he's true. We build this world and then we live inside of our own mental constructions, literalized, which is what this world is. But with nanotech, this goes into real time. As I imagine, so it becomes, and this is the very essence of magic. We'll have buildings that self-assemble, right? We'll move into an age beyond scarcity, right? Because scarcity is contextual and technology is a resource-liberating mechanism. So all of a sudden we can move a few atoms around and turn some dirt into a banana. It's gonna get weird. Nanotechnology is also advancing exponentially. Try to conceive of what nanotechnology is. It already exists in nature. When you plant a seed in the soil and it turns into a tree, that seed is an information file. That seed is an information file. It's software that writes its own hardware and instructs the matter around it to turn into a tree. So with nanotechnology coming under conscious control, we start steering how that works. We bring it and borrow it from nature, and we nurture it and direct it. So these exponential advances in biotechnology, nanotechnology, and the continuing advances in artificial intelligence, the creation of non-biological forms of thinking, engender us a kind of godhood. In Silicon Valley, they refer to this as the technological singularity. The singularity is the moment in which we become something we cannot yet conceive. And that has happened before. When language emerged, it was like a line drawn in the sand. And the humanoids on the other side of language, right? The ones that came before this thing called language could have never imagined the poetry, the symmetry, the storytelling that would emerge after language. It was a revolution of the mind. Try to explain to a chimpanzee the nuances of a Pablo Neruda poem. Try to explain to a chimpanzee the plot of a Chris Nolan film. Chimps are bright, but they don't have language. And us, at this moment, we're like the chimp, and we're gonna create this new transformation. It's just beyond the event horizon where we will merge with these technologies, I believe, and we have the capacity to become something else. We are unfucking finished. So the next video I want to show you is kind of like a little trailer for the overlapping biotech, nanotech, AI revolutions, and like, whoa, because I think it's the artist who realizes that the future is the present and uses his work to prepare the grounds for it. Please show the second video.
So let's talk about the future of us. What does that even mean? The future of us. It's a look at what comes next. It's a look at what might be. Because today, exponentially emerging technologies are transforming what's possible. They're helping us overcome, transcend even biological limitations. The very rules of what it is to be human are up for grabs. We're rewriting the software of life with biotechnology. We're turning matter into a programmable medium with nanotechnology. We're creating sentient minds with artificial intelligence that are not bound by the limitations of biology. These three overlapping revolutions, GNR, genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics, together will be leveraged to lead us towards a black hole-like, impossible to fathom singularity. It's like staring into the sun, a moment of a rousing symphonic climax when all of mind, leveraged and networked together, transcends its biological origins and we become something more. People worry about the AIs and the them. Well, as Kurzweil says, that's going to be us. The future of us is ours to dream up.
Think big, right? Think bigger than ever before. We are unfinished. Once a mind is stretched by a new idea, it will never return to its original position. The most important lesson here is to get out of your cognitive comfort zone. Those mental patterns and mental habits that constrain your capacity to imagine what if. We are all clouded by our routines. We trivialize ourselves with trivialities to mask the faint disquiet. I don't blame you, by the way. But here's a project by which we could lend our efforts and creativity to do something cosmological, right? To impregnate the world, to impregnate matter with mind. That's what it's all about. And then for what, right? Well, to use these transformational tools, to use the supercomputers in our pocket, to use this exponential power to impact humanity in a positive way. This is not just to tickle and delight us. This is actually to fix the world, to address the grand challenges of humanity, and not think, oh, we can't, or the problem is insurmountable. It is not. You just have to think exponentially, right? There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. So a while back, we decided to make a video. It was inspired by some messaging put out by Singularity University and some other thinkers about redefining the term billionaire. Because in a world of startup culture and entrepreneurship and the international creative class that's like figuring out the next cool app that's going to make you the next Mark Zuckerberg. And by the way, dream big, right? You're only one algorithm away from being a billionaire. This video that I'm about to show you redefines the term billionaire. And the idea being that in the age of exponential technologies, right, being a billionaire doesn't mean making $1 billion. That part's just incidental. Being a billionaire in the age of exponential technologies, of truly understanding the staggering, the astounding implications of exponential technology, being a billionaire today means coming up with an idea, a product, or an algorithm that positively touches 1 billion people. That's the new billionaire. And I believe that each and every person in this room, when you get out of bed in the morning wondering what's your purpose, what's your passion, think big. How can you touch 1 billion lives? How can you touch 1,000 lives? It's within your grasp. Geography has collapsed as a limitation. Time and space no longer apply any force against you. You can do this. And that's what this next video celebrates, which, by the way, was shot with a smartphone to make the point that in the devices in our pockets, we can put out a message and reach 1 billion minds. This one reached a couple million in our way. Okay, you can show it.
We live in a world of exponential technological advancement. What this literally means is that we have new construction kits for our reality, new tools with which to probe at the adjacent possible. So consider the implications, right? As Marshall McLuhan used to say, first we build the tools, and then the tools build us. We are designed by what we have designed. There are these feedback loops of mind, tool, and world that radically redefine our boundaries, that radically transform what it means to be human. To be human today is to crisscross the skies. To be human today is to create technosocial wormholes, mind-to-mind communication that overcomes the limits of time, space, and distance. And so what do we do? Well, we need to radically reach out to one another in ways that we haven't before. There's a great line that says, empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. In other words, if it's out of sight, it is out of mind. But if anything, these wireless communication technologies are radically extending our line of sight. They're providing new ontological maps of the real. They're giving us the astronaut overview effect. We are seeing the big picture. We are seeing that we are the captains of spaceship Earth. And what shall we do? We need to extend our hands to one another. We've never had such tools to overcome all of the limitations of our humanity. We have the power, we have the will, we have the capacity, the creative capacity to overcome our limits. And so today, billions of us linking to one another, creating a global node, a global brain. What is the new definition of billionaire? The new definition of billionaire is he who will positively affect the lives of 1 billion people. He or she who will reach out and say, I will positively affect the lives of a billion people. This should be our goal. This is our responsibility. Here's our chance.
We are unfinished. So I've spent most of my remarks today distilling the human condition as I see it, and then providing one response to our limitations, which is to harness our creative capacity, right? Our capacity to create virtual models with our imaginations, and how, in combination with our modest-looking thumbs, that was sufficient to usher in a secondary force of evolution called technology, and how it will continue until the entire universe is at our fingertips. I've walked you through the dazzling implications of this exponential progress, which is really an extension of our creativity. Technology is us reflecting us back. So here's where it gets interesting. And this is a very fair question I receive from audiences often. Technology is a double-edged sword. You can use fire to cook, or you can use fire to burn the village next door. You can use the alphabet for poetry, or you can use the alphabet for hate speech, populism, and weaponization of social media, and fake news, and fucking Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. You know, like, rhetoric can also metastasize into a cancer. Language is perhaps the most destructive technology if used in the wrong way. So if technology is just a non-specific amplifier of consciousness, then consciousness is really the engineering project that we need to become invested in. So this whole idea that's emerging now of hacking consciousness is a very exciting space. My friends Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler are the authors of a new book called Stealing Fire, which talks about, again, stealing fire from the gods. And now, with advances in psychology, technology, neurobiology, and pharmacology, we are getting to look underneath the hood of mind itself. And mind and consciousness has become something that we can mediate. We can take under conscious control. We can upgrade. We can hack our self-systems and turn our self-systems from leaky buckets into chalices, and perhaps render ourselves whole, and perhaps render ourselves holy, in the words of Jamie Wheel. These guys are the co-founders of the Flow Genome Project, an organization that aims to deconstruct the highest states, the states they call north of happiness, that human beings are privy to. We're talking about the runner's high. We're talking about the jazz musician in the pocket. We're talking about the rider in the zone. We're talking about the athlete in flow. Flow is a state of consciousness in which humans feel their best and perform their best. It is characterized by feelings of selflessness, your sense of self, the inner chatter, the self-doubt, the fatalism, the inner critic, the neurosis, the negative emotions dissipate. The self experiences this as liberation, as no mind, as heightened lucidity and clarity, as heightened presence. So when you're in the flow, selflessness is there. There's also timelessness. You lose the tyranny of time. You stop feeling time passing. You're in the forever box. You're in the eternal now, and it's fucking awesome. So you have selflessness, you have timelessness, you have effortlessness. When you're in flow, you perform better, and yet it's easier. You don't feel the effort, you don't feel the labor. You're light on your feet, and everything just flows. So you have selflessness, you have timelessness, you have effortlessness. Finally, you have information richness. The acronym is STIR. Selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. Richness of information, richness of download. The artist feels this as if something is going through him, right? It comes through you, but not from you, and though it is with you, it belongs not to you. The engineer has a clarity of vision. So how do we get into the zone? How do we get into flow? There's 1,001 triggers, but probably the most exciting space today is all the research happening with psychedelics. Whether it's psychedelic microdosing, whether it's the legalization of cannabis in California, giving a whole entire population of creative people a chance to modulate the contents of their own consciousness in contents and containers that they can control and see what happens. Or people suffering from the maladies of anxiety and depression, the highest suicides rates we've ever had, ever. These people getting to go in a single session with the worst case of PTSD, anxiety, and depression, sit with a therapist in a safe container and take a legally assigned version of MDMA or psilocybin, having a mystical experience and being cured of their affliction in 1 or 2 sessions at the most. Consciousness is now becoming the ultimate engineering project. The new space is inner space. This is also when we get to go beyond the Darwinian selfish survival instinct and get to explore modalities of consciousness that are more communal, where you see the other as yourself. I am because you are. Astronauts, when they go into orbit, experience the overview effect. The ontological shift that happens when you see the Earth as a single organism, the vantage point transformation, and how it makes you more empathetic and more compassionate and kinder, right? It gets rid of the existential sadness. It gives you a sense of purpose and brotherhood with other people. It boosts your creativity. This is what these encounters with the numinous do. So my concerns are not necessarily what are we going to do with all of these technologies. These technologies are fucking awesome. My concern is whether we can deal with the shit going on in here and fix it so that we can use these tools in the right way. So the next video is one of my newest. It's called Ego Death, the Art of Ritualized Surrender. And it's a bit out there, but I think you guys can take it. Please show the next video. Let's talk a little bit about experiences of ritualized surrender, right? Psychologists often tell us that it is in the act of letting go that you find out who you are. The prospect of ego death, however, the prospect of any kind of ritualized surrender feels like dying, but only to those who resist it. Those who eventually come to realize that there is no such thing as death, at least that psychological dying into the moment is but an illusion, the last hurrah, the last resistance before you hurl yourself into the abyss and realize that it's a featherbed. You know, Terence McKenna talked about this. He said, this is the secret. This is what all the shamans, the professors, the wise men, this is what they understood. This is the alchemical goal. This is how magic is done. You hurl yourself into the abyss and you realize that it's a featherbed. Our society today is constructed, we know this, in a way where many people are afflicted with a pathological amount of anxiety and depression. It's what Jamie Wheal calls 21st century normal, this fibrillating, anxious state from an overactive ego stemming from a misfiring default mode network, which is the autobiographical mind, which is essentially metastasized into something that is a kind of autoimmune disorder of the self. And the excessive rumination and self-consciousness that characterizes depression and anxiety both come from a mind that has become too ordered, too rigid, too hyper-vigilant. It's like we're all living with a perpetual micro-PTSD. And what the research tells us, and this has informed so much of my creative life, what the research now tells us is that in safe containers and with the proper precautions deployed, the experience of ecstatic surrender, the experience of ego death, what Jamie Wheal calls the bliss fuck crucifixion, is actually where all the healing is done, right? It is when you die into the moment that you realize that all your fears are unfounded. You come to see that everything you want is on the other side of fear, right? It's like that David Fincher movie, The Game, reveals to us in that line that says, quoting the Bible, John chapter 12, verse something, whereas once I was blind, now I can see. It is hard to put language to these instances of ecstatic surrender, right? Hurling yourself into the abyss and realizing that it's a featherbed arrives you at a domain that exists outside of time. The self experiences this as liberation from the incessant inner chatter. We are free to be ourselves. We become infinite is what it feels like.
Transitory enchanted moments in which we hold our breath, compelled into aesthetic contemplations we neither understand nor perhaps even desired, face to face with something commensurate to our capacity for wonder. We experience afresh the hardly bearable ecstasy of direct energy exploding in our nerve endings. We recontextualize the self as a marvelous conduit in a timeless whole, from which molecules and meanings flow from neurons to nebula and back again. We see the world in a grain of sand, and we see heaven in a wild flower. We hold infinity in the palms of our hand. We hold eternity in an hour. And then the moment will pass. And all contradictions are reconciled. Man has surpassed the gods. And what do we find after these enchanted moments? What do we find after these moments of opiated adjacency? When we spill over, when we overflow, when we are cracked open so that the light gets in. We find that people report increased feelings of well-being in their baseline reality, increased feelings of compassion, increased feelings of creativity, increased feelings of joy, a sense of having glimpsed noetic truth, a sense of having tapped into the infinite, a feeling of communion with the cosmos, an ontological awakening, a spiritual experience, a forceful reckoning with what is, a mainlining of space and time through the optic nerve. We become what we behold, and we behold the infinite. Miguel de Unamuno wrote in Tragic Sense of Life, eternity, eternity, nothing is real that is not eternal. So the question remains, right? We know the way, we know the path, we know what we must do to heal ourselves. How might we turn our passing illuminations into abiding light? How might we turn our self-systems from leaky buckets, right, colanders full of holes, into chalices, said Jamie Wheel. How might we render ourselves whole? How might we render ourselves holy? This has become the central preoccupation of my life.
Yeah, so I was pretty high in that video. Okay, I know that was a lot, but I'm almost done. I just want to say a few things about, probably in the space of positive emotions, even beyond flow, what I believe is the highest of all human emotions, and that is awe, right? Awe before the infinite, awe before the cosmos, awe before that humbling incomprehension. And there's been some recent research at places like Stanford and Berkeley in California that have done studies on the subject of awe. And they ascribe the experience of awe as an experience of such perceptual expansion, such perceptual vastness, that your entire models of reality, right, these mental blueprints that you acquire in childhood that then govern how you see the world, your models of reality are either obliterated or have to accommodate themselves to this new experience that you're having, whether it's the first time you saw the Grand Canyon, or the birth of a child, or the first time you had an orgasm, or the first time you actually looked through a telescope and actually marveled at the stars, right? If you truly have a decentering experience, an experience of opiated adjacency, an exhilarating neurostorm of intense intellectual pleasure, what Carl Sagan describes as understanding as a kind of ecstasy, then you've experienced awe. I have always felt that the greatest art that can induce awe is metaphysical science fiction, right? The kind of cinema, like whether it's 2001: A Space Odyssey, or The Fountain, or Inception, these kinds of movies that take your mind and literally send it tumbling down the rabbit hole. You're kind of never the same again after you have these experiences, is kind of incredible, right? It's like the video pills exist. Access to awe exists. So I kind of tell people, if you're ever in a funk, if you ever need to be like reoriented, tap into that sense of cosmological awe and wonder, right? And so this last video is an homage to that feeling. It's an homage to that rapture and rhapsody, and try to take that in, take that sensation and apply it, right, to all the ideas we've talked about today. Think about technology with awe. Think about the human condition with awe. Think about what we might do with our tools and technologies with awe. Think about psychedelic psychotherapy, altered states of consciousness, and hacking flow states with awe. If I want one experience for you to walk out of here with today, is just to be in awe. Please show the last video. So this is a score from the movie Sunshine, directed by Danny Boyle, screenplay by Alex Garland, a film that portrays a mission to reignite the sun. The sun is dying, and humanity's last hope is a ship that's going to deploy 10,000 nuclear bombs to reignite the sun. I mean, what a plot. And the music, the score, perhaps more than anything else, is the soul of the film, for it manages to render an ineffable feeling, which is to come face to face with God Himself. Right? All the human stories, all the religious myths, all the origin tales of the Son of God, so to speak, well, referred to the sun. In ancient pagan religions, the sun was God. All of life comes from it. It is, you know, the atoms that were cooked in the furnaces of dying stars that created everything. And so, for human beings to come face to face with that in the observation deck in the movie Sunshine impregnates the plot with a metaphysical and religious flavor and tone. You can't help but get caught up in larger questions about what it means to be sentient, questions about the human spirit, questions about our capacity to come together and overcome the greatest hurdles. Wow. Only dream I ever have is the surface of the sun, says one of the characters, as the incandescent light bulb of creation burns itself in their retina. Oh my God. Metaphysical science fiction films blend religion and science and psyche to create a psychedelic experience that cracks us open and lets in the light. And the divine dream weavers that make these films, that compose these scores, that direct these screenplays, the gods on the screen that beckon, that show us what might be. We know what we are, said Shakespeare. We know not who we might be. Just sit with that for a moment. Ah! Percussion kicks in, intensity levels rise, emotion nears climax. Oh, fuck. And then, you spill over. You overflow. You mindgasm. You went to God just to see, and you were looking at me. The raptures radiate. You sing the songs that orchestrate the universe. One final gasp. So thank you for your attention, guys. I appreciate you so much. You're so nice. Thank you. I love you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, go listen to some music and we'll see you soon. Thank you.